He hated every moment of training, but he loved winning. He never made it to an intrinsic state. Yes, that is the ultimate goal, and that's where we really want to bring people if we can, and we're always working towards getting there. But just because you don't get there doesn't mean that you failed, and doesn't mean that you're not going to be like incredibly successful. Muhammad Ali was incredibly successful, and he hated that training, but he loved winning. He loved being a champion. He viewed himself, that identity shift that I was talking about, he viewed himself as a champion, and this is what he did.
Dr. Allan Bacon, welcome to the American Glutton Podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me on, Ethan. I'm excited to get into some fun conversations with you today.
Yeah, man. Well, you look great. You share great advice and insights on social media, which is where I became familiar with you. How did you get into this? What was your evolution?
Oh God, this is a very strange kind of a circuitous route to get here. I had started off my formal career as a dental surgeon, and spent many years doing that. I practiced for 10 years, and I had always been interested in health and fitness. It was a big part of my life. I mean, when I was growing up, at about 16 or 17 years old, when I first started lifting, I was 6'1", and 165, 170 pounds, and so. Playing high school sports and all that kind of stuff, I was like, man, I really need to put on a little bit of size. And so it started getting me into lifting. And it took off from there. And so for many years, I was doing this as like a passion project and something that was just fun for me. And, shifted into a different career and kept this going on the side. And towards the end of that career, before transitioning, one of the things that was kind of the impetus of this was my father ended up getting throat cancer and ultimately passed from it. But a conversation that I had with him towards the end was, if you could do this over again, what would you do differently? And he was thoughtful about it and said, if I had the ability to do this over, I would, one, spend more time chasing my passions, and two, spend more time with friends and family. And at about the same time, December 24th, 8:30 p.m., I'm doing emergency surgery on somebody when I'm supposed to be spending Christmas Eve dinner with my wife's family. And so I thought about it, and I was like, look, I've got a basis of knowledge in health and fitness. I've got some background in being able to read research and understanding the human body. I think it can really help people here. So I talked with my wife. We decided to do this as kind of a side passion project. And, it became a really important thing to me because I saw the challenge that my dad had in health and all these issues. And I'm not saying that having the right, nutrition and training program and all that can 100% prevent cancer, but the reality is we're genetically predisposed to these things, right? And if we want to have the best chance possible about not falling prey to them, taking care of ourselves is the least selfish thing that we can do. And so it became a mission of mine to spread accurate information, hopefully prevent people from going through the same things that my family did, the same things that my father had to go through, and, eventually made the transition full-time into coaching. I became lucky enough that the message got out there enough. There was enough demand for that type of career for me. And, it was a scary change, but it was one of the best things that I've ever done because I have been able to help people in larger scale and hopefully make a difference, not only in how they feel today, build their confidence, build their ability to, hang out with their kids, do all these different things that they want to do, but maybe stave off some of these major health concerns later in life. And they might never know that this happens, but hopefully that's one of the outcomes in doing what we do.
Yeah. A couple things there. Like you said, it's one of the least selfish things you can do. There's surely a version of some narcissist who is in the gym 8 hours a day just to take selfies and is not present in other areas of his life. Fine. But for the most part, I think I had an inverted idea of time for myself actually assisting the other areas of my life. And so like when I really wrapped my head around the point you were making, when I go to the gym, when I eat in the way that is most beneficial for me, it actually affects every area of my life beneficially, that it does become truly less selfish than the inverse, which is I'm going to be more present. I'm just going to take that extra hour and spend it with my kids, but I'm in a foggier space and I've eaten like garbage and I'm not taking care of myself and making myself the best version of the father that I can be, or the husband that I can be, or the coworker that I can be, or the friend that I can be, it does become truly less selfish to take the time and go like, if I'm going to be the greatest teammate in any of these various teams I just listed, it requires a little bit more out of me for myself too.
Yeah, but what's interesting about what you're pointing out here is people think that this is a selfish thing, and I think that we're on a good message here by pointing out that this is not a selfish thing. If you're talking about things like kids and even spouses or loved ones in your personal circles, kids in particular will pick up off of what you do. And if you're telling them or giving them subconsciously the idea that, spending time on your own health is a selfish action, they're going to grow up thinking that. And that can, and I know that people aren't doing this intentionally. So I don't want parents to feel bad if this has been your experience in life, but I want people to take a step back and start thinking about this. They're going to take cues off of what you do, not as much what you say. What you do influences your kids more than anything else. And if you show them that it is an important thing to be taking care of your health, we're not saying that you always have to be a robot and eat only clean foods or whatever it is, but that it's important to have a basis of a diet off of that. And then you have room for those indulgent foods within a moderated amount, right? This is that good relationship with food that you're teaching your kids. You're teaching your kids emotional and mental coping mechanisms, because that's a really big thing with like stress eating and emotional eating. The way that you respond to that is important. By showing them that you can do these things, you're building them up for success later in life. They will, one, value it more, but they'll feel that they are capable of doing it. And if you are constantly saying, I never have time to get into the gym, I can never do this, I can never do this, they're also going to start believing that themselves. And so this is not to put stress on people or parents, that have these challenges that, a 20-year-old kid in college doesn't have. But if you send the message through your actions that this is doable, even if it's something where maybe you can't do everything, do what you can do, that's an incredibly valuable thing for your kids. And what I mean by that is, yeah, maybe that 20-year-old in college can go to the gym to lift weights 5 days a week. Maybe you can only do it 2 days a week. But the fact that you are making time for that is incredibly valuable, not only for you, but for everybody else around you. And I think that when we start to look at this as, this is not a selfish thing. Not only is it going to give me more years of my life, it's going to give me more quality years of my life to be able to spend with these kids. And if you think that that missing out on a couple hours each week is going to counterbalance missing out on 15 years on the back end, you're completely wrong. They're going to value that more than, those couple hours, as long as you, put things in perspective, explain what's going on, make sure that they know that they're loved. I mean, there's a way to do this where you can fit it in with your daily life and make this a very productive thing. And I think that the us touching on the concept of people look at this as a selfish thing is very true. And so we need to free people from this mindset, because that back end payoff is far more than this, initial feeling of guilt, because you're going to start to get away from that feeling of guilt when you put this in the right perspective.
Yeah, for me, strangely enough, and I'm not a Randian objectivist at all, but I do happen to appreciate the way they think of selfishness, which is anything you do, anything, is coming from a place of selfishness. The most altruistic thing you could possibly do is selfish because it makes you feel good. So people tend to not do things that make them feel bad. So it's all just a perspective on like, yeah, we're all selfish anyways. So look at your life. Look at the most ideal landscape of your life you could possibly have, and then be selfish in achieving that, because you're being selfish in achieving the shittiest version of your life too. So either way, it's selfish.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if people can get over that hang up, they're going to do a lot better in life.
Yeah.
You're going to, one of the biggest issues with this type of thing is that there are ways to do this where you're going to experience significant amounts of guilt afterwards. And then there's ways to reframe this. And I'm sure that you've looked into this extensively, but the way that we view the things that we do, the way that we view our identity, the way that we view all of these different things has an extreme outcome on, the how happy we are, how fulfilled we are. And mindset shift is a very important thing, because it's going to open up possibilities for you and your family that you never thought were possible.
Yeah, to your point, another point you made, which was for many years, I was on such rigid and strict diets that, like, the holidays would come around, I would be the guy at Thanksgiving dinner who only had turkey breast on my plate. And my kids spent a large portion of the day cooking and they wanted me to taste everything. Nope, not tasting anything you made. I'm just eating my turkey breast. Or, God forbid, I was on even a more strict diet and I was eating like 2 pieces of Melba toast and, 2 ounces of chicken breast or something insane like that, which was many holidays when they were little. And I got to the point where I was like, those structures that I built up were so rigid that the first fissure in them sent the whole system, the whole scheme collapsing down. And it just kept happening in cycles that actually, for me, being able to taste something my kids made and share a meal with them is far more important in my life and happiness. And that's been the way I've been living for the past 7 or 8 years, that like it actually brings a large sense of peace to them and to me. Like, oh, you bake banana bread? I'm going to try your banana bread. I might not eat a whole slice, and I'm certainly not going to, be sneaking back in here to polish it off when you're not looking, but I will taste your banana bread and I will acknowledge the effort you put into it, which the really rigid diets that I did in the past gave no space for that kind of life.
I mean, it's very much like an abusive relationship. And I don't think that people realize that that's what's going on here. Having that very dichotomous thinking is very problematic from a sustainability standpoint, because we can all force ourselves to do anything for 2 or 3 months, right?
Yeah.
For 2 or 3 months, you're like, man, I'm losing weight really good. I'm eating boiled chicken and broccoli. I'm on that 1990s bodybuilder diet. And yeah, that shit works, but it's not going to work long term for a normal human being that is not completely neurotic, right? And so this is a really difficult thing to address. And I think that one of the biggest things, there are coping mechanisms that you can use to make this a lot easier. And I think that one of the biggest things that you need to address first when we start talking about this topic is that most people will say, well, if I'm not succeeding, then it's an issue with willpower. And I think that, coaches, at least through the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, we used to really push willpower. Not me, but we as a collective used to really push, oh, if you're not committed, then there's something wrong with you. And then we kind of went into this shift in like the 2010s, 2015s, where we're like, okay, well, it's not willpower. The reality is it is willpower, but it's not entirely willpower. There's obviously some level of willpower involved in this, but it's easier to manage this if you realize, okay, well, if I'm comparing myself to like Deborah from the cul-de-sac, who is 150 pounds, and I'm like 190 pounds, right? And she can eat whatever she wants and fine. And I'm always struggling and I always feel restricted. Well, part of the reason that is because she likely has grown up over the decades with different coping mechanisms to be able to deal with this, all the cravings, all the issues that she faces in life, all these challenges that people face in life. There's nothing wrong with you. You haven't learned to deal with these types of things. And so when people talk about these restrictive mindsets, one of the issues is they're looking at it so dichotomously, and they haven't learned how to use their willpower productively. And the way that I like to put it is, if Deborah from the cul-de-sac and you have the same 100% battery charge on your willpower, she has coping mechanisms in place and habits and routines in place that every day she's only draining 20%, whereas you're draining 95 to 100% every day because you're raw dogging the entire thing. Yeah. And so the question, the thing isn't, she doesn't have more willpower than you. You're forcing yourself to use more on a daily basis, and that's why you burn out. And so there's a lot of different strategies that we can use to start to understand how we can manage this and lower the amount of willpower required, because you have the willpower. It's just we need to do it in a way that is not draining you completely every single second of every single day. And what you were talking about before with, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, I couldn't do this, that's part of that. That's part of that mindset. That's part of that thought process. And so you have to realize that every day, as a person that's going through this journey, particularly if you're trying to lose body fat and change these habits that you've had over life, you're going to be experiencing challenges. You're going to be experiencing specific stressors that are going to test your willpower on a day-to-day basis. And so the first thing that you can do if you really want to start to overcome this type of thing is start having a food diary or a food journal. I think that this is the wonderful place to begin, because it allows you to identify your emotional and environmental stressors that can trigger these things. And to give some people a little bit of a sign of hope from science, because if you've been following my content, you realize I'm a little bit of a science nerd in some of these places. And so when we look at stress and emotional eating and how people respond to the challenges that they face in a daily life, what's really cool is there was a study by Hurl and colleagues that looked at a twin cohort. And I won't go too much into the science, but I want to point this out because this can give people a lot. They looked at these people that had identical genetics, and they tried to identify, are they struggling with the way that they eat, the way that they emotionally respond to food cues or stresses based on their genetics or based on their environmental factors and what they've learned. And they found that nearly all of their experiences and all of the way that they respond to these things is a learned trait, not genetic. And this is very good to know. This is very empowering, because if you realize that this is a learned experience, then you can do something to unlearn it. You can do something to learn something productive. And so one of the ways that we do this is we start through something like a food journal, which I think that everybody who has never done this before and is struggling with, I have all these cravings, I feel, if you've got anxiety around food, this is something that you need to be doing. And I don't want to create anxiety by saying that you need to do this, but this is something that you can do pretty easily. It's relatively free, spend $6 and get a notebook. And then, monitor the things that are going on in the hours before you feel like you've lost control.
Yeah.
When you do that, you're going to start to notice patterns. Am I reaching for the donuts every time I get back from work? Am I doing this because of something that happens with my kids every day? Every time my kids come home, I get a little bit stressed out. Every time I go to I get a visit by HR or whatever it is, you're experiencing something. So then you can start to realize that those cues are in your life, but that gives you the ability to manage those cues. Because if you realize, okay, well, I've got a pattern, every time I drive home, I take that route that passes McDonald's or whatever it is. Maybe I take a different route home. Maybe I don't take a different route home, but I've acknowledged the fact that this exists. And if I can remind myself of it, then I can make a conscious choice to be able to do these types of things. So this food diary is that first step, because it allows you to identify those stressors in your life and then being able to manage them, because information and knowledge is power. And this is how you start to get into that information. And so then you want to start putting forward strategies to be able to deal with those challenges that you face on an everyday basis. And
there's a weird my experience is what you're saying is very, very accurate, and science aside, anecdotally, that was my experience. And I think of it in the way of like there's been movies where, like, if you know the demon's real name, you have power over the demon, or like
that's exactly what it is.
Once you peek behind Oz's curtain and you see that it's just a dude pulling levers, he's weak, he's powerless. Knowing that, and I didn't start really doing that until my first time trying maintenance, where I was like, I'd been killing myself doing keto, hiking 12 miles a day up hills with a heavy pack on, and I was plateaued, and I was like, this is fucking insane. What I'm doing is insane. And there was a confluence of events. I read Bigger, Leaner, Stronger. I saw Mike Israetel's TED Talk or TEDx Talk, whatever, The Scientific Landscape of Healthy Eating. And I was like, I haven't tried that. I've tried all these crazy fad things that are easy. This seems really hard. I'm going to try this. And I started writing everything down, and I was like, well, I guess I got to do maintenance. And in maintenance, I was writing everything down already, that I was like, well, let me just start writing about how I feel when I'm doing this. And you really do start to see it's so weird, because my experience with it was there's just madness inside my head. It's just chaos, movement and voices and arguing with myself and pulls and directions. And the minute I started to go like, oh, this is what's happening. I saw a fucking billboard and it made me think of a cheeseburger, and then I got hungry, and that's the hedonic pathway to hunger. And understanding that mechanism killed its ability to be just this overwhelming urge to need to eat a cheeseburger. Once I started recognizing that I I was a little down. This guy said something kind of weird to me at work. It made me feel in a certain way. And all of a sudden, a half an hour later, I found myself in my trailer just binge eating and getting it outside of my head and understanding those mechanisms was a massive, massive shift in my ability to be powerful over them.
Well, it's very subversive, isn't it? And so what's really cool about this is, and this is what I like about what you are illustrating here. This is an outside factor that is influencing you. This is not something that's you.
Right.
And that's what I want to point out with, like, we're changing our identity around this type of thing. We know that it's not genetic. The way that we respond to these things, our habits and our routines are not genetic. And even when you look at research that looks at, okay, well, does this person have the ability to lose body fat? They found that genetics is about 2.4% of the reason that the ability to lose or gain body fat.
Right.
Now, where you are to begin with has a lot to do with genetics because people have different, resting metabolic rates and all that, but it doesn't bind you into staying that way. You have a lot of control over where you go. That's not to say that this is easy. That's to say it's possible. It is largely controlled by your habits. And when you realize that these are external factors that are affecting you, it's not something that's inherent in your nature. It's not you. You aren't fat. You have extra body fat because of the experiences you've had in life and all these different things that you're going through. But you can get through this and realizing that this is an external factor and it's something that you can't control gives you that autonomy to be able to do this type of thing. And I think that that's what people really need to know is that they've got the ability to control these situations if they only have the tools in the toolbox to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's why you naturally started doing things like writing your own food diary down maybe you were consciously doing this. Maybe you didn't realize that this is what you were doing. But again, this is that first step that really starts to tell you what's going on. And then that gives you the ability to make some of these changes. That gives you the ability to adjust your food environment. If you know that billboard is always affecting you, maybe you don't drive by that billboard. If you know that every time you get home, you reach for the Oreos that are in the cupboard, maybe you either get them out of your house entirely, maybe you put them in the back of the freezer so they take some time to thaw before you can take them down. And I know that people will say, I've got kids, therefore I can't get rid of these entirely. That's fine. And put them in a place that's not within eyesight, because if it's consistently bombarding you, again, this is going to drain your willpower more than Deborah from down the cul-de-sac who doesn't have kids and doesn't have this in front of her face. She's dealing with different things than what you're dealing with. This is not your fault, but make these adjustments. And even if you decide, I'm going to get this out of my house entirely, that doesn't mean that you can't have it. I love the way that we look at it this way. That doesn't mean that you can't have Oreos. That means if you decide to have Oreos, you need to drive to the store to get them, get a very small pack, and only eat that small pack. What's cool about this is it gives you the ability to make the choice to do it. It forces you to be a little bit inconvenienced when you do that. And you'll find a lot of the times, maybe even more than half of the time, you're like, screw that. I'm not going to drive to the store. That's stupid. You just told yourself that you don't need the Oreos then.
Yeah.
It that creates some hurdles, creates some barriers, because then that can be a very, very powerful thing. And it can allow you to take control. And one of the ways that I like to do this is something called fighting food anxieties. And if we know that we've got specific trigger foods, and you'll identify this type of thing over time with that food diary, you can handle it in one of two different steps. First, after adjusting your food environment in whatever way is most productive for you, you can set moderated amounts of trouble foods to have daily and see how that works. Say I can have 120 calories or 150 calories or whatever it is, depending on your size and your goals, of Oreos or chocolate or whatever, and see how that works. Yeah. If you can stick to that, great. You have just removed the power that food had over you. You're showing that food is not forbidden. It cuts the guilt out, because if you set those rules ahead of time, you can now eat it and enjoy it and say, I did this in a controlled manner. I stuck to my 150 calories per day, and I now have control over this. You've just removed that stressor from your life.
But what you're saying about convenience is so accurate. Like, I can relate to this so much. Me on my own, if I order a pizza and I get a slice of pizza, but I have the whole pizza sitting in front of me, that is a recipe for disaster. But I also have 4 kids and a wife. So if a whole pizza is coming and it's like, listen, this is just the way I was raised and the way I exist. My wife and kids eat first. And if there's a slice left for me, I can deal with it because that's it. There's a slice left for me. You know what I mean? But if it's a party and there's 5 pizzas being ordered, I think for that day, pizza's off the menu for me because it's just too, I'll be back time and again at the pizza station. And so the inconvenience is useful there. Buying the small pack of Oreos. If you're going like, I get 5 Oreos a day and I'm going to go to Costco and buy the biggest, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it'd be a problem.
Yeah, no, that's a huge problem. But so this is people taking control. And so this is the cool thing about, like, there are obviously strategies and differences in like when you're going out to parties, right? Because you've got less control over those situations. So if you're going to be doing that, what I like to do is to tell people, and it's funny that we're kind of just getting into like, here's a strategy, here's a strategy, here's a strategy.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's actually a really good thing, because when people come to these podcasts, and if we just talk like, around a topic, it doesn't really help people. So I like this idea of
Actionable stuff is cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, if you're going to be going out to a party, I like giving these strategies that give people the ability to make choices for themselves. Because if you tell people you can't have these things, that's that restrictive mindset. We want to work from the base is an abundance mindset. Always think, what can I add to my diet to make things better? But when you do that, you're going to be thinking, can I add more lean proteins? Can I add more fruits and veggies? Can I add more? One, it's a positive way to look at things. Two, you'll naturally start to push out some of those more indulgent foods, because if you're eating like 4 apples a day, you don't have room for as much chocolate as you did before. And that's okay, because this is going to be getting you those nutrients and everything like that. But in situations where we have things like a party or whatever it is, I like to tell people, look at the month that's coming up. Figure out what events you have coming. Now, you're not going to be able to predict everything, but you're going to be able to predict a lot. When holidays are coming up, when, you're going out with like the in-laws a lot of the times, when whatever it is, write them down, put them in order of importance to you. Say, this is the most important. Christmas Eve's coming up. That's really important to me. I've got a holiday party with my coworkers. God, I hate them anyways. It doesn't matter. So whatever it is, but you can put this into perspective, and then you can make actionable steps to do things. Because if you know that these things are coming up, one, if that Christmas Eve dinner that's the most important thing to you in this month is coming up on Friday and it's Tuesday, well, you can look at that break room coffee cake that your friend brought in and say, I know that I got something coming up. I don't need to have this because I'm gonna enjoy something then. It gives you a stronger position to just say no, and saying no is a very powerful tool that people need to learn. Saying yes sometimes is good too, but this helps you put things in perspective, so you don't feel like you've lost out on this coffee cake. You know that you're going to get something that you want later. So by doing that, it allows you to say no in some of those events that maybe are not quite as important to you, because it gives you the grace to say, I'm okay. I'm not restricting myself. I'm choosing to have something on this other time period, and that's great. So you give yourself the ability to do that then. The other thing that you can do about this is you can plan ahead when you know that these things are coming up. And if you've got a less important event that's coming up to you, we'll have, a protein shake or a more moderated choice, a non-fat Greek yogurt or fruit or whatever it is, anything that's essentially leaner protein, higher fiber, lower calories, higher volume before you go out to these events. That way, physical hunger is not going to play as much of a role in the choices that you make. You're going to be able to moderate volumes much more easily. So if you're going out to a party and there's pizza there, well, maybe you would have been able to down a pizza and a half regularly. But when you've got, 2 apples and a protein shake in you, maybe you're only able to get in 3 or 4 slices. So you've just done a lot of benefit there in that sense. But it helps you to continue to take control of a situation where you can go there and feel less stressed about what you're choosing. And so I like the idea of, one, being conscious about what's going on in the near future around you. And I usually just say a month because that's the easiest. It's a very easy time concept to remember. What's going on in this month ahead of you? What's the most important? And then can you manage some of your hunger cues before going out to these things that you're going to be a little bit more tempted at than when you're at home? Because a lot of times people are like, I'm completely fine when I'm at home. The issue is that when I go out and I get tempted because all this is right in front of my face. I mean, exactly what you said. And again, this is that now all of a sudden that willpower battery is being drained. This is what's happening to you. So when you start to realize that this is what is happening to you, that's when you make these strategy changes to deal with them.
Yeah.
And realize it's completely fine for you to go out to a social event and make it about being social and not about the food.
Totally.
I know that Oktoberfest exists, but there are a lot of these holidays that are based around the food, but enjoy it within a moderated amount, and particularly when alcohol is in play. And that alcohol is going to lower inhibitions for a lot of other things. having that plan ahead of time can make things a lot easier. So if you're going to go out to something like Oktoberfest, and it's, you know,
It's
based on the
beer and brats and
right, it's never gonna. I'm
cocktails.
German heritage anyways, so this is a fun concept for me.
Yeah.
So like, you're going to be tempted. Set yourself a limit before you even go out, and set yourself a limit before you even go out, because then you're making a conscious choice, and then it's not an emotional choice in the moment. I'm going to have 3 drinks max. This isn't a challenge. You don't have to have 3 drinks, but you cut yourself off at that level. All of these strategies are about taking control of the situation where you can, because when you take control, that gives you the grace to be able to have a little bit of those indulgent foods. It teaches you that they're not the devil. It also relieves the guilt afterwards, because if you've made these choices before you go out, well, identifying the most important days for you, whether it is setting a limit in how much you drink, whether it's setting a limit in, a specific indulgent food, that 5 Oreos comment that you mentioned is a really great thing. This is giving you the grace to do it without feeling the guilt afterwards, because if you made this as a controlled, conscious choice when you're not in the moment and not emotionally invested, it's what you really want.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing.
I have so much fun with reconnaissance. I literally make it a game. There was a long time where my wife loves being social, and I can honestly take it or leave it, but because my wife likes it, I want her to enjoy herself. And for the longest time, I just thought of it as such a burden. And then I was like, forget it. I'm going to start doing like the way I travel. Whenever I go anywhere for many years, I do it's all in our phones, where you're staying, what the restaurants are nearby, what's available, is Instacart available, can I get to the grocery store, is there a place nearby that serves food that will be good to me? And I just started doing this with restaurants. I will look up the menu and decide hours before or days before, what am I going to order there? Because if I sit down and look at the menu and it's like fried calamari will leap out at me if I'm hungry, and I'll wind up eating a bunch of stuff that I leave the restaurant feeling guilty about. But if I make the decision beforehand, I'm going to get the chicken breast or the salmon and a salad, then I show up. I don't even have to look at the menu.
That's absolutely perfect. And what's really cool about this, what I love about this type of thing is, some people will look at this and they'll say, okay, well, this is a little neurotic and I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Don't worry, you don't have to. What's cool about this is the more that you do this, the less that you have to plan ahead, because you start to train yourself to understand the foods that you react well with, the volumes of foods, the types of foods that you choose, going out to different genres of restaurants. Yeah, it might take a few months to a couple years to really kind of get this down, right? But I bet I can probably confidently say for you, it's probably easier to eat out at restaurants now than it was when you first started that journey, because you've started to teach yourself how to do this, but you did it through concerted effort and thought. That's why this is an amazing thing. People will look at this and they'll say, oh man, this is really difficult. And I don't really, I can't view myself doing this for the rest of my life. You don't have to, because it's going to get a lot easier.
Yeah, no, it gets so much. Listen, there's still effort. And for me, there always will be, and that's okay. One of the biggest things I've had to confront, and I feel so relieved just accepting that I'm gonna always have to put some effort into it, but it gets so much easier. And the reconnaissance part, like, I started to enjoy it. I started to enjoy knowing exactly what was going to be available everywhere I go. And it's a game. I'll like call my wife's friends about their party and, fake like I'm just into food and be like, what are you serving? I'm really interested. You know what I mean? Like I get sneaky like that. And really it's just selfishly, I want to know so I can plan ahead, but I make it interesting to them too. Like, oh yeah, that sounds like that's going to go great with this other thing. You're doing Passover. Are you doing a brisket? Like, what's in they make this noodle dish, and I ask her but it's silly, but it's for me to have more power and have more knowledge going into every situation. And I enjoy it, but I can understand somebody going like, that's exhausting. I don't want to have to do that. And it does get much easier.
So what you pointed out here can also cause a little bit of stress in some people. And I want to acknowledge that too. A lot of people, rightly so, will get concerned that if they start to eat in a different manner, that they're going to get flack from the people that are in their lives. And it happens.
Sure.
I mean, this is a very real thing. I want people to really understand that this is expected. particularly of people that are kind of in your circle, but not necessarily in your inner circle. Getting to the ability to say no to people is very important, but there are people in our lives that we do have, utmost respect for. We want them to accept us. We don't want, to have some of these issues. And this is something that I've seen a lot with some of my female clients, but sometimes a significant other or a really good friend can almost become a little bit belligerent when you start, changing the way that you eat and start thinking about these types of things. And there are ways that you can kind of get around this, because I know that this is a very difficult thing and raises a lot of stress in people too. The best thing that you can possibly do, particularly if they are a very close person to you, is set them aside if this is something that you find is really challenging you. Explain what you're trying to do. Emphasize that this is not about them. Particularly significant others will be like, well, are you expecting me to change? And they might get a little bit defensive about that. Guys tend to get a little bit more defensive than women do in these situations. Explain what you're trying to do. I want my health to be better. I used to go out to restaurants and my kids would watch me sweat because I was so stressed. I don't want to be that guy anymore. I want to be able to set myself up for success. So explain what you're trying to do. Explain that this has nothing to do with them in whatever nice way that you can possibly do it. Say that this is for you. Then the next best thing that you can possibly do, and I love this because it works extremely well, tell people that are in your inner circle that you really care about that you need the support. Can you help me? Can you be part of this journey with me? I don't expect you to change, but I need your help. All of a sudden, you've turned this around. It is no longer expecting them to change. You are conscripting people into being your advocates, and people are very, very open and accepting of that. When they realize that you need their help, and when you ask them for their help, all of a sudden you've turned them from a potential combatant in this situation to someone that is on your side.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to say no to them as much. Now, if it's somebody that you don't know that well, screw it. Say no to them. It doesn't matter anyways. You don't respect them. That's that Deborah from the cul-de-sac who's a bitch anyways, because she can eat whatever she wants. So you don't worry about that. But there is a very real concern with people that you are close to that this can be problematic with. And so I think that telling them, hey, I need you to be on my side. Can you help me with this? And giving them the option, that almost always brings people to your side. If there's somebody that cares about you, they're going to do that anyways. But I think that fear of lifestyle criticism is very real and very valid. And so when we start to look at it as, okay, well, I can have these people not only not work against me, but really help me out here. When you realize that, it can become a very powerful thing. Now, yes, you're still going to have to learn to say no over time, but this makes it a lot easier when those people that are closest to you are no longer adversarial.
Yeah. It's they're very similar and maybe more apparent through lines in the area of like substance abuse recovery. I'm also sober, and the guys that my primary association with them was doing cocaine. Those were people where it was like, well, I'm not hanging out with you in the nightclub anymore, and this happened in the late 90s. Like, this is not for me, but if you want to like meet for coffee in the morning or go for a walk, I'm around. And I think of it like I didn't, by the time I started to like really get serious about my diet, I was married, I had kids, and that was no longer a thing. But it was like, there was a period in my life where we would do UFC at my house on the Saturday nights that UFC was happening in the early 2000s. And we would either get like a huge barbecue spread or do pizzas. And suddenly, like, I still want to have people over and do that. But like, I'm going like, I can't, it's really hard for me to sit there and watch all my friends eating pizzas or, barbecue beef brisket with white bread, and so I did have to talk to all of them and go like, hey, I'm trying to change. And like, if you want a certain type of food, bring it, but please just bring it for yourself,
Right.
Like,
yeah.
And that was okay.
Yeah, it is. And that's something that can make a big difference in people's lives. And particularly when you're having, a situation like you're having friends over. Yeah, that's a way for you to manage the situation to benefit you without putting them out. And I think that there are a couple different strategies that people can use for that to really make things a little bit easier. I think that identifying whether or not something is a physical or emotional or hedonic type of hunger can be a very beneficial thing, because I think that a lot of people don't even realize that those are different things, because until you start to think about it, you just associate hunger with hunger. but they are very different. And again, all of this goes back to taking control. And so if we can understand some of those different things, then we can actually be productive. These are the strategies that, like, it's funny when we talk about this stuff because, you know, people want to break these cycles. And it's very difficult to break these cycles if you don't know what you can do to actually break these cycles. And so being able to identify,
or not even knowing what the cycle is. Like you said, for me, I experienced hunger and there was no differentiation between I've had a long, hard day and I need food to fuel my body, and my body is saying, like, we're running low. And, you know, I walked by a McDonald's and they're intentionally and directionally sprayed scent of French fries hit my nose, and suddenly I was overwhelmed and I just ate. And I wasn't actually hungry, but now I'm suddenly starving and can't stop thinking about cheeseburgers and fries. Those two things, I couldn't parse out in my mind that there was any difference. My body was telling me you need to eat. And so when I got the science on it and it made perfect sense to me, I now tip my hat to McDonald's. They spend billions of dollars every year trying to make me hungry. And I just say, not today, Satan. You can't get me because I know what you're doing. I can say your name and the demon has no power.
Yeah, I mean, Grimace is a real dick.
Yeah.
And so you got to deal with this type of stuff. But so that emotional versus physical hunger, and what you're saying here is exactly it. You had just eaten, you are not physically hungry, and yet somehow hunger is there. Emotional hunger is very sudden. It's not satiating. It's mindless eating. You can realize it because it's located in the mind, not in the stomach, and it often will lead to guilt and anxiety. If you are physically hungry, it does not lead to guilt.
Right.
We want to make things as easy and as actionable for people as possible. And so one of the things that I like to do is to tell people to use something called an apple test. And I've heard this in a variety of different manners. You've probably heard this before. Some people call it the chicken test. But if you ask yourself, so you're walking by McDonald's and you say, okay, well, I'm really hungry. Would an apple work? If the answer is hell no, an apple wouldn't work, well, then you're not physically hungry, because anything that will fill your stomach will work for physical hunger. But if you're very focused on the experience, the texture, the taste, the smell, that's a hedonic hunger or an emotional hunger. And particularly people that have had obesity in the past, to give people that are struggling with this type of thing a understanding and empathy. You have higher hunger cues, like these types of things, than a normal person. Then a normal person is a terrible way to put it. Than a person that has never lost the weight before. So if you're comparing yourself from Deborah from down the cul-de-sac, who is 150 pounds, I know she sucks so bad. If you're 150 pounds, if she's 150 pounds, she's always been 150 pounds. Let's say you have gone from, you're a woman that was 200 pounds, you've gone down to 150 pounds. So you're both 150 pounds now. You're going to likely have higher hunger cues than she has. And in fact, there was a study out of the NIH by a researcher called Hall that looked at this, and it can be up to 100 calories more per day per kilogram lost. That is a lot of extra hunger in a diet. Now, that's not to make you feel like you are, doomed or anything like that. But if you know that this hunger is normal and that you're going to be experiencing it, then you don't have to say, oh, woe is me, why can she handle this and I can't? Well, your willpower is being drained a little bit more. But again, knowledge. If you know that this is happening, you can start to make some of those changes. You can identify, okay, well, what did Allan say about, identifying whether this is physical or hedonic hunger? Okay, well, can I have that apple? I don't want to have that apple. Okay, well, good. Well, that just told you exactly what you need to know. So now do you wait 20 minutes to see if this craving passes? Because oftentimes it will within that time period. Do you choose to have the McDonald's because you know that this is an emotional hunger, but will having, a moderated McDonald's meal allow you to stay more on track? Otherwise, it could be a good choice. You might choose to have the McDonald's. Or you say, okay, well, I know that this is a hedonic or emotional type of hunger. Do I just choose not to have this? Well, either way, in any of these choices, you're now giving yourself the ability to take control over the situation. So you should feel a hell of a lot better than what you did before, where you were just going in because you walked by and you smelled it and it was an emotional choice. As long as you can take that pause and make this conscious choice to be able to do this, you're going to be in a much better situation.
Yeah.
You're going to feel much better about yourself.
Yeah. Somehow recognizing it, understanding the mechanics, was a huge leap forward to me in just being able to separate out the noise that I was experiencing,
Hmm.
just the utter cacophony in my head of like, I just ate. What's happening?
Yeah.
I can't stop thinking about food right now. And tracing it back and going like, yeah, I walked by that McDonald's and the smell was overwhelming. And
Hmm.
the red background, the red field with the golden arches played to my sense of wanting a treat of some kind. Just recognizing that diffused it to a degree. It's not like it wiped it out, and it's not like it doesn't
Right.
happen, but I'm able to see it for what it is and go like, I'm not doing that. I'm not playing that game anymore.
And depending on how often this happens, that's where you start to look into, okay, well, is this my daily routine that's causing this problem? Am I slipping because of this daily routine? That food diary being that first step is really good because you can identify this. Do you go
Yeah.
past that McDonald's every day? Then it helps to realize, okay, any habit that we do in our life has the same anatomy, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. And understanding the anatomy of a habit can allow you to make the changes that you need to change this for the rest of your life. Because what we want to do is we want to remove that drain on your willpower battery as much as possible. And putting things on autopilot with habits and routines, adjusting your food environment, this is how you do this. So if we know that a habit is constructed of a reminder, a routine, and a reward, we can start to make some changes. The reminder is whatever causes that trigger. Maybe you're driving past that McDonald's on the way from home, on the way home from work. The routine is the response that you have to that trigger, and the reward is the outcome from that routine. So if the reminder is I pass McDonald's every time I go home from work, the routine is I stop into the McDonald's to pick up, a Big Mac meal, and the reward is I get to eat this Big Mac meal. But then the outcome is that I'm obese, and it's causing me these problems, and I feel like I'm out of control, and it's causing a depression spiral. That's a reward. It's not a good reward, but that's the reward of this habit.
Yeah.
So you say, okay, well, I've identified that this is happening all the time, so I need to make a change in this. I know, based on what Allan had said, that there have been studies that have been done in these twin cohorts that this is an emotional, it's a learned response. It's either a learned routine or it's the way that I respond to emotional stress or whatever it is. So I can change this. You cannot always change the reminder. If you can, say, drive home a different path and not pass that McDonald's, that can work. But that's not realistic in most situations. It's probably the fastest way home from work. Maybe that reminder is like your kids coming home. You can't stop your kids coming home. It's seeing like some food in your house. You can't get rid of that entirely because you've got kids and that's something that they eat. So the best thing that we can identify to adjust is the routine, that second R in the reminder, routine, reward. So if we want to change a habit, and it will take concerted effort for a while, maybe quite a while, you can adjust that routine to give yourself a more productive habit. And you can do it in one of two ways. You can either substitute a different type of food, one that you would consider traditionally healthy. And I don't want to push a dichotomy of good foods versus bad foods, but there is more nutritious and less nutritious foods. And if you're trying to lose excess body fat, choosing those leaner proteins, higher fiber, higher volume foods are a good thing. So this is where you might have that apple or that, non-fat Greek yogurt or a protein shake or whatever it is. If you don't want to have it, well, there you go. It's a hedonic hunger. So adjusting these types of things can help. Or you can make an adjustment to an activity. It has to be personally relevant to you. It has to be readily available. You have to be able to do it. And it has to be either something that will relieve stress in your life, bring value to your life, or is productive in some manner, like maybe getting like washing your clothes or something like that. Maybe it's not something that you love doing, but it will cut down stress later, right? So play video games, read a book, go play sports, go for a walk outside, like all those different types of things. As long as you can do these readily, and I would recommend that people write down 5 things. What's meaningful to you? What do you like doing? What can relieve stress? Can you go read a book? Can you play video games? All these different types of things. If you have it written down, when this type of thing happens, you can look to that, put it on a note thing on your phone and then start doing that. It's going to take concerted effort when you first start this, but over time, your mindset shifts to, I'm going to do this instead. And just like you, when you go out to restaurants after you had been adjusting the types of foods that you were choosing at restaurants, that becomes second nature. So all of a sudden, that routine, you've now changed that bad habit into a more productive or a very helpful habit in your life. And so when we start to do these things and we start to realize the anatomy of the habits, we have the power to be able to make these adjustments. And I want to really emphasize in this, you've probably heard some variation of this. It takes 30 days to make a habit, or it takes 90 days. I've heard so many different ones. I don't know what each person's heard. But when we look at the research on this, it takes between 18 and 254 days.
Yeah, it's not 30 in my experience. It's mine is towards the longer end.
Right. So I want to point that out, because if people are trying to make these changes, know that it might take a concerted effort. It might take a concerted effort up to like about a year. Yeah. I mean, it could take that long. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. And most important of all, when we look at this research on changing habits, is if you're going to try to change a habit, screwing up, you're going to screw up first off. Accept the fact that you're going to screw up at some point, because you're trying to change 30, 40, 50 years of habits. You're not going to get it immediately. You're not a robot. So it's okay. But screwing up is a temporary thing. If you screw up, as long as you focus on, as long as I can get back on track the very next time, the very next instance that I have, you're going to be fine. It's not going to throw off that habit building ability. The issue is when it starts to spiral for people. Yeah. If it becomes a snowball effect and you get that fuck it mentality. And so now you have, you went to McDonald's one day and you're like, well, screw it. I'm just going to go out to like KFC for dinner, and then I'm going to go do this. I'm going to do that. That will throw off your habit building. But it doesn't have to spiral out of control, because a blip on the radar is a blip on the radar. And that's, going out to McDonald's once. I mean, it's just like having one salad is not going to make you thin.
Yeah, no, one trip to McDonald's is completely inconsequential, in my opinion. It does nothing. There's guys who I like some of what they say, but then they'll be like, I would not drink a diet soda. It's poison. I would not smoke a cigarette. And I'm like, one cigarette's not going to kill you. One diet soda is not going to kill you. In fact, I'm a fan of diet soda.
Diet soda is completely fine.
Yeah. There's diet soda and cigarettes cannot be in the same category.
They're not close.
But like a trip to McDonald's, if you're weighing out long-term health, it's like, yeah, if that's your primary source of food, maybe we have to have a conversation. But a single instance of eating that is not even part of the conversation.
No, and I like to give people grace. And the people that I work with, I actually talk about, so there's different ways that you can set up a diet and being able to track. I think that everybody should track food at least for a few months at some point in their life, because you need to really understand what you're taking in, right?
It was a absolute game changer for me.
Yeah. And this doesn't have to be a thing that's the rest of your life, because I realize that people don't want to be weighing food forever, but you need to do it for a little bit of time, because otherwise you don't really know what a serving of peanut butter looks like. It is depressingly small. Yeah. And so
mine was olive oil. My wife kept saying, like, how much olive oil is in that salad? And I'd go like, a tablespoon. And she'd go, I don't think that's a tablespoon. And when I finally measured it, it was way closer to a quarter of a cup, which is a lot more than a tablespoon. Yeah.
Yeah. And it adds up very, very quickly. And so what I like to do if people are tracking something like macros is I'll say, okay, well, we want to have that idea that you can have some of this less nutritious food in a diet, because a lot of times, let's be honest, that actually helps with adherence and consistency long term. It also gives you a better relationship with food for most people. So what I would say is, 5 to 20% of your daily calorie intake can be a discretionary food choice. And that means it can be from literally everything. Now, people will say, well, why is there such a large range? Well, it's a large range because it's dependent on the person. It's dependent on the type of food that they choose with that discretionary calorie intake. And it's dependent on your goals. If you're setting foot on like a bodybuilder stage, you're going to be closer to that 5%.
Right.
If you're just trying to hold steady where you are, you're going to be closer to that 20%. And that's okay. 80% whole, minimally processed foods is a wonderful base of a diet. You've got some room for popcorn, chips, whatever it is, as long as it doesn't throw you off and doesn't become a trigger food that causes binges. Because if you're choosing that and all of a sudden it's becoming 40% of your diet, well, then you're not sticking to that 5 to 20% anyways. But what we want to do is I want to give people a little bit of a guardrail or a guideline, because you can say, hey, make your diet out of whole, minimally processed foods. But if you don't give something like those goals, people don't know what that means. It's not actionable.
Yeah.
because then you think, okay, well, if Alan and Ethan say that I need to make my diet out of whole minimally processed foods, you can become neurotic and say, well, then I can really almost never have any of these things.
Right.
And that can be a drain on you too. So this is a fun, like, it's a fine balance. It's like we're walking on a tightrope, but by having this conversation that we're having, we can remove that tightrope. And now you're just walking on a sidewalk because you've got guidelines. You can feel more comfortable in the choices that you're making. And maybe for you, 20% of a discretionary calorie intake doesn't work daily. That's okay. Go to 10. See what happens.
Yeah.
There's not going to.
I like the see what happens routine because it's not dogmatic. It's like trying to understand that like this is a very individualized thing that you're dealing with.
Well, not only is it individualized, it's different per season. So what season of your life are you in? Are you a person that is recently divorced and you're trying to take care of 3 kids? Well, you might need to give yourself a little bit more grace, and maybe you don't think, okay, well, I'm going to be losing all these pounds on the scale every week, but holding steady might be a win during some of these weeks. Maybe this is where all of a sudden getting into the gym twice per week is okay, even though traditionally you've gotten in 5 days per week. Well, maybe you need to give yourself a break. Doing what you can do is a very important thing. The entire focus of a fitness and health journey is all or something, not all or nothing. The all or nothing mentality has destroyed more fitness journeys than anything else. I mean, this is a restrictive mindset. You're not a robot. You're going to screw up. But when we look at all or something, all of a sudden screwing up can become a temporary thing, or being challenged can become a temporary thing. And if we look at screw ups and we say, okay, well, just because I had that McDonald's doesn't mean that I failed. It means that I had a temporary setback, depending on how you're looking at this type of thing. Maybe this was McDonald's you had multiple times when we were saying don't do this multiple times in a row, and you did. Okay, that's fine. As long as you don't give up, you haven't failed. Look at that situation and ask yourself, what can you learn from it? And then write that down. Can you change some of the different things? Can you put it forward the strategies that we've talked about? And when you start looking at failures as being temporary and learning experiences, all of a sudden your life becomes a hell of a lot better, because it's not something that is you. It's not you that is a failure. It is the this one blip in time. But the people that are really successful are people that look at these things and they say, okay, well, how can I learn from this? And that, accepting that some of the place of where you are is because of your actions is an okay thing. That's not a bad thing. You got to accept where you are because of what you're doing. That means that you can make changes to adjust for that. And so by looking at these failures as temporary and as learning experiences and changing them from failures to challenges in your mindset, you can start to make those habit changes that we've talked about. You can start feeling better about yourself. You can start to feel like you're in more control of the situations. And so anytime that I've got somebody that I'm working with and they're like, you know what, I went on vacation and I indulged a little bit more than I would have liked. I'm like, okay, cool. That's in the past. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to send me an email. I want you to tell me where you were challenged, and I want you to provide the ways that you would adjust this if you were put in the same situation again. And then we'll talk that out. And it's very important for you, even if you're working with somebody, to come up with solutions on your own. That doesn't mean that the person that you're working with, a registered dietitian, a coach, whatever it is, isn't a parachute for you. But the coach or the dietitian or whoever it is needs to put the onus on you, because that coach is not going to always be there. But if you start to think in that way, you can start to come up with solutions for yourself, and it can give the coach ideas of what would work best for you. Because when you start to say, okay, well, maybe I should have done this, what do you think? That gives a person that is working with you the ability to say, okay, well, Ethan says that he would do this. That gives me insight into what works for him as an individual.
Yeah.
And so, yes, maybe that coach or whoever it is might give you some adjustments based off of what you said, but it gives very real insight into what will work for you as an individual. Because when we have these conversations, it's really funny. There's not a specific answer that will work for everybody.
Right.
Because it's so psychological, right? And it's so emotional. And
well,
that's okay.
I've just one more question, and I want to frame it this way because I'm a sober person. I had to go to rehab a number of times. And there was something about when I would come off drugs where, and I think this is all about like I was pushing down so hard on the dopamine throttle for so long that then it took a long time for joy to return to life. Literally, there would be a gray cast to life. I mean, there's no other way to explain it than life was dull and joyless. And
It looks like Mexico from Breaking Bad.
it looked
You have the
gray.
sepia filter.
Yeah, no, truly. Like I saw my eyes perceived light differently. It was awful.
Mhm.
Um, and then when I got on the cycle of dieting, I was so hell bent on if I can just lose the weight, I'll be fixed. And I bought into many instances of very extreme rapid weight loss. And when I would start that, I would experience the same grayness and dullness to life. And it was so hard. And then I woke up, 15 years into this repetition of like, God damn it, I basically need rehab again, for food. What am I going to do this time? Okay, I guess I'm going to do, the first personal diet or the ideal protein diet where life gets gray. You're removing so much. You're in such a caloric deficit that the joy evaporates from life for the period of time. But I believed so strongly that I just needed to lose weight, or I needed to lose enough weight, or I needed to get to some. When you have somebody who comes to you, and I was at my wit's end buying into these, fad,
Get fit quick.
get fit quick diets that never worked, that I could lose weight, but I could never sustain weight loss doing them.
Mm-hmm.
And now when I start a cut, like if somebody says like, I want to take a picture of you in 2 months, I'm like, great, no problem. And I start a cut and it's just such a mild version of what I'm already doing that there's no dissipation of joy in my life. My life becomes a little bit more structured. But if you have somebody who comes and they really are under the impression that they just need to lose weight as quickly as possible, what is the conversation?
So what you're getting at here and why your life became a lot easier is because all of a sudden internalize your motivation. When we first start doing this type of thing, we have a very external motivation. I need to get to like 150 pounds. I need to look good in a bathing suit. And all these things are perfectly fine for getting started. I don't want to get down on anybody. If somebody says that the reason that I'm getting started is because I want to look good naked, great. That's awesome. Over time, what we need to do is we need to internalize this motivation if we want it to last. And you've started to get into that journey, which is based off of everything that you've said today. I mean, I've been seeing this as you're talking, which is really, really cool. But let's point this out so people can realize what's happening, why you are successful, and where they can go to get to the same kind of, success that you've had. First, we would likely benefit from changing the way that we look at proper goal setting. Proper goal setting involves habit-focused goal setting. And most people, when they first start out, will focus on outcome-based goals. Outcome-based goals are things that you can't control. And
Right.
Again, over and over and over and over, all we talk about is maintaining and gaining control. That's what really works. When I'm talking about outcome-based goals, it's I want to get down to 150 pounds, or I want to be able to bench press 40 pounds more. I want to do this in 6 months. That's bullshit. You can't control that. You can't control how much the scale moves. You can't control whether you're 150 pounds. Is 150 pounds even the right choice? Why do you think it's 150 pounds? What if you look better at 165 pounds? Like, and specifically for people that have never really gained a whole lot of muscle, all of a sudden they're like 15 pounds heavier and they look better than they thought they would at 150 pounds. So let's get off of this idea of setting the scale weight, setting these arbitrary things as goals. That's number one. Focus on habit-based goals. What can you control? This can start moving that focus away from a before and after and start focusing on what actually makes sense to focus on, because this is what's going to bring you to long-term success. Can you control? I mean, you can pretty much control everything you put in your mouth. Let's be honest. You can control the foods that you put in your mouth. We live in a society that has food in so much abundance. All it takes is a little bit of planning to be able to choose what foods that you eat. Yes, you can't control every situation. Maybe you're traveling, but for the most part, you can control a lot of what you put in your mouth. So one, can you control your consistency and adherence with your diet? Can you control your step count for a day within a realistic goal? Because you were talking about like walking 16 miles a day. Can we get a short-term goal for people that like never walk? Can we get 6,000 steps? For most people, can we get between 8,000 and 10,000 steps? And these are different types of things that it's going to take a little bit of a concerted effort to be able to start to build these habits up. So don't get down on yourself when you first start this, and get a coach if you need help on figuring out how to incorporate this in your life. But there are certain things that you can control. You can control largely how many times you get into the gym in a week. That doesn't mean that you can always do 5 days. Can you control getting in two if that's what you can do within your life within this season? Can you control, getting a little bit more sleep each night? Can we stop going down the YouTube rabbit hole where all of a sudden we're learning how to tie, boat knots for a random reason at 3 a.m. instead of getting to sleep? These are different types of things that you can control, but you want to choose your goals, your weekly things as activities or as these habits and routines that you can largely control. And that's step one, because that's moving us away from that idea of, well, the outcome is the only sign of success. If you control, your consistency and adherence with your nutrition, if you can control your step count as a proxy for NEAT, if you can control largely how much you sleep, the physique is going to take care of itself. And it's going to teach you those habits and routines that we want to build anyways. That's going to lead you to that more autopilot lifestyle. That's going to give you that ability to maintain this for the rest of your life. And then internalizing this motivation is something that's concurrently going on with this. Ask yourself, one, why are you doing this? And I don't mean because I want to lose weight. Great. Nobody just wants to lose weight. Why do you want to lose that weight? Is it going to make you feel better about yourself? Is it going to give you, a better chance of meeting a girl that you would like to meet? Is it going to allow you to play in a sport better? Like, why is this happening? What do you want to get out of this? And then start to shift that identity. We move away from this outcome, this before and after as our goal, to what do I find valuable about this journey? You don't. Ultimately, what we would love to do is to say, I work out because I love doing it. It's a great thing for me. You don't have to get there. You don't have to get there for success, but that intrinsic type of motivation is the best that you can possibly have. But you're always working towards that. So can you shift your identity a little bit? Okay, well, maybe you don't love everything about, working out or eating healthy, but it's just something that you do because you're an athlete. And you're a healthy person. And if you have that mind block of, okay, well, I'm not a healthy person. Okay, we'll do something very simple. Fake it until you become it. Kind of like fake it until you make it, but a little bit of a shift. And so ask yourself, when you're in a situation, you're out at a restaurant, what would a healthy person do? I can guarantee you the large majority of the time, you probably have a good idea of what a healthy person might do, even if it gives you some anxiety to take that leap.
Yeah.
So if you're asking yourself, well, what would a healthy person do? What would an athlete do? This identity that you're trying to establish for yourself, it cuts out a lot of that noise. It cuts out the decision fatigue when, if you're not asking yourself that question, well, you're like, well, I could get the nachos, or I could get the salad with lean protein on it, or I could get all these other things. Well, if you're finding that you're struggling with this type of thing and it's making you, overanalyze, or it's making you not actually make a decision and you're basically procrastinating, well, what would a healthy person do? Largely, that will cut out the majority of the decisions for you. And then you can say, okay, well, that kind of answers it for me. And so we want to work towards this intrinsic type of motivation. But like I said, you may not ever get there. Maybe you just focus on, well, I really like the benefits that it gives me. I like that I'm able to spend more time, I'm able to spend better time with my kids. I'm going to live longer. I feel better. My clothes fit better. All these different things. They can all be very motivating. And they can all be very motivating, in conjunction with each other. It doesn't have to be just one. It can be a lot of these different little things. And so hopefully you can get to the point where you're like, I just like eating this way. It just makes me feel better. I just like going to work out. It relieves all this stress for me. It's just part of my life. It's who I am. It's what I do. Wonderful. But even if you never get there, don't worry. That's not a real problem. And the example that I like to point out here is Muhammad Ali has a famous quote, and I'm going to completely butcher this, so don't quote me on it, but the idea is real. He said that he hated every moment of training, but he loved winning. He never made it to an intrinsic state. Yes, that is the ultimate goal, and that's where we really want to bring people if we can, and we're always working towards getting there. But just because you don't get there doesn't mean that you failed, and doesn't mean that you're not going to be like incredibly successful. Muhammad Ali was incredibly successful, and he hated that training, but he loved winning. He loved being a champion. He viewed himself, that identity shift that I was talking about, he viewed himself as a champion, and this is what he did.
Right.
And so when he had that question,
he did it because that's how he viewed himself.
Yes. Yes. And so we don't have to view ourselves as, oh, this is something that I have to do, or this is something, this is something that you get to do. You have the ability to make these changes in your life. And there was no more time that was appropriate to kind of make this shift than the COVID era when people were like, wow, I really wish that I could get out to the gym now. I never realized how much I like enjoyed that. Remember that feeling that you had. You had the ability to get out and do these types of things. We take it for granted now.
Yeah.
And so if we can start to look at this as, okay, well, I have the ability to do this. I have this is a thing that is a benefit in my life, and it can give me all of these different things. And maybe there are parts of it that are fun. I love challenging myself. I fucking hate hard cardio in the middle of it, but afterwards I'm like, man, that felt great. Like,
Sure.
I feel really good. In the middle of it, you're like, man, this sucks.
It sucks.
But a lot of times that you can start to have that mental shift. I hated training legs for the longest time. Every day I go into the gym now, I'm like, and anytime anybody asks me this question, it's 100% a lie, but it actually helps a lot. Anytime anybody asks me this question, what is your favorite muscle to train? I'm like, I fucking love legs. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, I absolutely love it. I have said it so many times that I became so consistent in the way that I trained legs that this is the way that you start to do this. Fake it until you become it. This is a very real thing, and it really works. People will feel stupid doing this type of thing, but these very simple techniques that work incredibly well with repetition over time, this changes your mindset. It changes the way that you look at things. The Apple test, asking yourself, what would a healthy person do? All of these different things, when you talk about them individually, they sound kind of stupid. It's like, well, I mean, that's dumb, right? The things that are the most effective are the most simple. They're the most readily available. They're the easiest things to do, because when there are no barriers to doing something, you are much more likely to do it. So throughout this entire podcast, the answer is break down those barriers and master the basics. No matter what question you have about how to do something in health and fitness and in life, it comes down to the same 4 or 5 answers. How do I improve my gut health? How do I get in shape? How do I improve my performance? How do I improve my confidence surrounding my health and the way that I look? Proper training, proper nutrition, stress relief, sleep. How do I optimize my hormones? Proper training, nutrition, stress relief, sleep. How do I sleep better? Proper training, nutrition, like literally every answer to all these things. It's not to go out and buy the most like exotic supplements or do these like really wacky workouts that are specific to this gender or this population. If Ethan is 5'4", he does this. If Ethan is 5'7", he does. Like it's getting so ridiculous in the social media space. And the answer is always still the same things. But the reason that we don't hear this as much, I mean, if you look at my content, it's always like just basics and getting rid of some of the noise that's surrounding this, because this noise that's all it is. It's noise.
Yeah.
Trying to micromanage. Well, can I have coffee in the morning? Can I do this at this time? It doesn't matter. If you are getting your nutrition covered, if you're getting in and staying active, if you are relieving stress, these are what matters. These are the big rocks. And I'm sure that you've heard this. If filling a basket with rocks is achieving, your health and physique goals, you pick the big rocks. You don't go for the tiniest little pebble and just try to do millions of tiny little pebbles. You put in like 4 fucking big rocks, and all of a sudden you filled the basket. And so anybody that you see on these podcasts that is trying to sell you on like a very complicated thing, it's probably all it is. It's probably missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, when I was at a thing over the weekend, and a woman was like, so you must only eat grass-fed beef and not eat seed oils, right? And I was like, well, no, I never really think about that. I just try to eat the leanest beef I can get. Right. And, I limit all oils, to a degree. I'm not drowning anything in oils. But
it's because you realize that those foods inherently aren't problematic. It's the calorie content that comes with them. And depending on your goals and what you've achieved, like that's how you adjust that. So you're not missing the forest for the trees. You're acknowledging that. I mean, seed oils is one of the funniest things, because there's no evidence out there that seed oils are any worse on a calorie per calorie basis than anything from dairy.
They're just in a lot of processed foods.
Right. And so when you have a ton of calories, it's going to cause problems.
Yeah.
If we replaced all that with butter and the same amount of calories, it's going to cause the same problems.
Totally. Yeah, no, I did a cooking video and I added a little toasted sesame seed oil at the end and got so much flack for it. And I was like, are you guys nuts? You're yelling at me because I use toasted. Like, what are you talking about? I bought it from a health food store. you know?
Yeah, I mean it's the same thing with like organic versus conventional. The differences in nutritional value are virtually nothing. And it's very convincing too, because this is kind of getting into that whole like myth busting territory, but it's very convincing because I could show you and I did a reel about this like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I can show you, okay, grass-fed beef has 200 to 500% more omega-3s. But then you realize that if you're eating grass-fed beef, a serving of grass-fed beef is only 1 to 2% of your daily omega-3s anyways. So you would have to eat 50 servings of grass-fed beef. So like it doesn't matter. Like you can say yes, if you're trying to influence people, you can massage the data to make it look like it matters when this stuff just doesn't matter. Like sounding like it has 500% more omega-3 sounds amazing. And then you realize that it's the equivalent of me saying, okay, well, I'm going to give you 200% more money, but I was only going to give you 1 cent to begin with. It's nothing. And so
I have a buddy who's wealthy, and he built a crazy gym at his house. And I went to look at the gym, and it was ice baths and red light beds and all this stuff. And I was like, what? This is your gym? This is like a spa. And he was like, no, I'm going to get into shape. And then he went to see a cohort of doctors. And at the end of seeing like the top specialists, I mean, the absolute top specialists, they told him, okay, what you need to do now is eat more protein and
nutrition,
some muscle mass. That's what they told him.
Those 4 things.
Yeah.
That we just talked about. The 4 things. Mastering the basics is the way to do this. Now, we talked about a lot of different mindset hacks, a lot of different hacks for nutrition, all that stuff. And that's wonderful because it gives you actionable advice, but it always comes down to these same 4 things, pretty much. I'm sure that there's going to be something that someone will be like, well, what about this? And I'll be like, okay, there's 5 things. But there's like these 4 things that I think about are, anytime I've ever been on a podcast, I point these things out. And the reason that this message doesn't sell is because it's not sexy.
And it's also not expensive. You can't bottle it. It's like anybody can start doing this today for free. Just
right. I can't run ads. I can't run ads on my reels because I'm not making any money off of saying these types of things. But it's for me, I switched from a career that was very lucrative into one that is not quite as stable, not quite as lucrative on the whole. These careers are only super lucrative for people that are kind of willing to like lie about it in a lot of ways. And so a big thing for me is really like, how do we simplify this as much as possible and actually help people?
Yeah.
And I like that about what I've seen with the work that you put out is you're actually focusing on the right things. And I know that a lot of people out there, they hate like the mindset stuff. Like it's not sexy. It's not like, well, can I buy this and then have an immediate result? No, you can't. But that's not what works.
I wanted it to. I tried.
Yeah. I mean, that's not what works, but following that stuff. So it's really funny because following that stuff, you're going to do it for 10, 15, 20 years. And then you're going to be like, all right, I'm finally ready for the nutrition, fitness, sleep, and stress relief. But a lot of people have to go through that. And shit, man, we talk about this so much and I try to head that off at the pass for as many people as I possibly can.
Yeah.
Can we stop you from going through years to decades of spinning your wheels? And hopefully this podcast can be a good stepping stone for people to get there, because I think there's a lot of value in the way that we set these things up. I mean, and even your personal experience has shown like, look, guys, you don't have to go through this. I went through this. You don't have to go through this.
Yeah.
That message is very powerful.
I hope so. There's a little bit of fear in me that I think, it's difficult to give people the answer. Sometimes people have to come to the answer on their own. And then I hope, well, if they heard this, then maybe when they go through it a little bit, then this will be quick. They'll be quicker to the answer because they experience it. Yeah. That's my hope. But I do think like with the amount of noise out there, with the promise that that your life will change if you stop eating folates and you stop eating seed oils and you get under a red light and you do ice baths, or, you just eat meat, or, you just eat vegetable, whatever. The amount of noise out there that promises you a total life overhaul by doing the 1%. It's just a lot, and it's sexy, and you have sexy people selling it, and you have celebrities endorsing it, and like I love Dana White. I love the UFC. I'm such a big fan. I've been a fan since literally UFC 3. I think I had video cassettes of those, and then when he took them over and he revolutionized them and made them this big sport, like I love watching UFC. The fact that Dana White is championing a guy because of red lights and ice baths, when
Yeah.
really the major changes I would point out to him are, no, you lost weight and you're in the gym.
Right.
And that would, those were like those, the red light and the ice baths did nothing to assist that. Maybe
Right.
in some placebic way, you know, you thought, because I was doing this, I'll work harder in the gym and with nutrition.
You know, you don't have to do it through
sad.
you don't have to do it through extreme ways either. I mean, I know exactly who you're talking about. And you don't have to do things like fasting, like long-term fasting. You know, there's so much misinformation about long-term fasting. There's, just as a quick overview for people that are listening to this, there are no benefits to fasting itself. Any benefit that has been attributed to fasting is actually due to the calorie deficit. You know, autophagy, any changes in cardiometabolic markers, body composition, all these things are due to the calorie deficit. And if you have a continuous calorie deficit, it yields the same benefits. And so, you know, chasing things like autophagy, I mean, Jesus Christ, this is some of the worst, you know, most misplaced energy that we can possibly have, because exercising increases this without the negatives.
Yeah. Autophagy was sold to me to reduce loose skin, and I bought it. I fully bought it. And I was like, okay, I need this autophagy thing. And then, like, it took me years to come to the understanding that, like, catabolization of the body, it's going to do fat,
It's
then
worse.
muscle, it's going to do your skin's an organ. That's the absolute last thing. You're going to be dead before you see any reduction in skin from autophagy. You die. Like, that's the end product of that. If you want to starve yourself to death, you're still not going to see a reduction in loose skin. You're going to see more loose skin because there's going to be no muscle under your skin. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you know as well as I do that building lean muscle is probably a lot. I don't want to put these words in your mouth. Building lean muscle can be a lot harder than losing body fat, and I only say that
harder.
I don't want to.
For me,
I do believe that, but I don't want to like disenfranchise any people, because you know, the challenges that you face are specific to the person, right? But the reality is, it takes a lot longer to build lean muscle than it does to lose body fat. And losing body fat typically is easier for people because it can be very motivating to see the scale drop every few weeks. Whereas building muscle, I mean, it takes, outside of that beginner stage, it takes a long time. And so if we're talking about things like fasting, you know, I am a fan of intermittent style fasting, 16-8, if it's an eating pattern that you like, but let's call it what it is. It's skipping breakfast, and there's nothing magic beyond that. That's what it is. It's just skipping breakfast or skipping dinner, however you set it up. But like these long fasts, they come with more negatives than positives, unless you are in a category that's medically obese to the point where if you don't lose body weight right now, you're going to die. And if that's the case, you need to be doing this under the guidance of a doctor and an RD, because they probably need to do some like nutrient replacement with you. And that kind of thing. But for the majority of people with these fasting protocols, I mean, you're going to want to avoid these as much as possible, particularly if they're longer ones, because this is going to lead to malnutrition. It's going to lead to lean muscle loss. It's not going to lead to a sustainable way to deal with food. It's going to lead to orthorexia. I mean, it's not orthorexia, like an anorexia, you know, type of disorder is potential here. You know, starving yourself is not the answer. How can we eat as much food as possible while moving towards our goals? That's the goal. That's how you should be.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to get there, and it's particularly difficult to get there for women, because I mean, you know, throughout the decades, we've always told women that being skinny is the right move. And I know that bleeds over to a lot of men too. But the good thing about recently, at least until some of the GLP-1 agonist type stuff has kind of come up, and now skinny is kind of making a little bit of a comeback. What I've really liked over the last 15 years or so is that we're valuing muscle and building that. And that makes a huge, huge difference. It makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. No, every study shows that, like, as we age, that's one of the prime factors in lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and quality of life.
And quality of life. Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's huge.
Dr. Allan, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on, Ethan. It was great to talk to you. And yeah, you know, I'm very thankful for having the opportunity.